After d4, d5, c4, knight c6, the main line against the Chigorin goes with c takes d5. Now queen has to take the pawn back. The knight cannot go to c3 immediately simply because queen takes pawn in d4. It's a free pawn, there's no compensation. So white's best move is knight to f3, and now there's the idea of playing knight to c3. We don't have a problem with having the queen in the center because there's no way that our opponent can attack us with the tempo. Like knight c3 doesn't work because now we're going to play e5. It's our move. Knight c3 is simply met by bishop b4, even though knight c3 is the main move now. I'm going to make another video in the future. Pawn takes pawn, which is a possibility, allows black to make a swap of queens, and white loses right to castle. But then this is going to be a pawn up for the white player, but still there's so much to talk about, and it's very unusual, so I'm going to skip it for the moment and I'm going to do it in the next days. Right now white plays knight c3, attacking the queen, bishop b4, pinning the knight. In this video I'm going to go through bishop to d2 next move to unpin the knight. This is very popular, but there's also other moves possible. Sometimes even a3 immediately, or e3. One by one we'll go through all of them. Bishop to d2, unpinning the knight, and now black takes the knight. Two options: pawn takes, bishop takes. Let's start with pawn takes. Seems logical. The pawn is centralizing and it's opening the file for the rook. But what black now plays e4. The white knight cannot go to e5 because we have two attackers over the square e5. So after g5, this is also a blunder because simply h6, and now the knight has nowhere to go. I mean, it could probably like sacrifice for a pawn, but then we're up a piece. And if white knight goes to the only available square, which is bishop to h3, then simply bishop takes, and we're up a piece, because if pawn takes back, then we have e3, and the pawn is attacking the bishop whilst the queen is attacking the rook. So back at this position, after e4, white can continue with knight to g1. Black's crucial move now is knight to a5. White will have future idea of developing the pawn to e3 and then push the pawn in c4 and gain a lot of space with a lot of tempos on the queen. This is not something that can happen immediately. So knight a5 puts more control over the square c4, and this is the crucial square that we're going to work on in this video, because we cannot allow white to push the pawn in c4, and we want to make this bishop in d2 silly, and also exploit that this is the most backward pawn of the white player. So from this position, let's look at some potential ideas to continue the game. One is e3, very logical, natural looking move. And the other one is rook to b1, developing the rook to an open file. Queen a4 check wouldn't make any sense. After bishop d7 comes with an attack on the queen will have to move again. b3 cannot be accessed, so after queen to c2, black plays bishop to b5, putting one more attacker over the square c4, and this is even more deadly because white will have to admit to having wasted time, but also because the white bishop will not be able to develop. Remember that the fianchetto cannot happen because the bishop can't go. White can't open the g2 square because we have an attack on the bishop and the discovered attack on the rook. So white will have to develop like this. But then we have this idea of stopping our opponent from castling whilst the queens are still on the board. There's no reason for white to play like that. And in this situation, if white continues with this plan, which is something that I've encountered a lot, it happens a lot, white is kind of annoyed with the pawn in e4 and wants to play f3 in the plan of e4 eventually, and he's hoping for a swap of pawns like this so he can develop the knight. But black simply continues with knight f6, and even though we're still in the opening, our position is so amazing, the computer evaluates this like a piece advantage. Because think about it, how can this bishop ever develop? It will not be able to develop because black is threatening to swap it. Taking the pawn in e4 after knight takes back, it's a suicide. It's just really terrible. And black king is one step away from safety. White king might never be. So in this position again, there's also gonna be queen c2. That's another possibility, but I'm gonna go through that in the next video. In this video, I'm gonna take into account ideas like rook b1 and the immediate e3. Let's start with rook b1. We don't need to take this pawn now, because then the white player might be able to fianchetto the bishop, and this bishop in g2 will be fairly powerful. So black continues with the safest move, b6, creating this chain pawn. And after e3, black can now take the pawn in a2. The reason is that yes, this bishop can still develop from g2 as mentioned, but there's this e2 weakness, and the light squares in front of our king don't look very well. If especially after black played b6, a move like bishop to g2 might be met with bishop a6, a monster of a bishop. That's just to mention some patterns that arise in this type of pawn structure. You gotta target the weak squares. Anyway, after b6 and e3, black can now take the pawn. As mentioned, ideas like f3 for black to get rid of this annoying e4 pawn will be met by knight f6. So we're not going to take an f3, and then when we get taken back, we have a knight there in e4 that is sitting amazingly. So let's have a look at this kind of idea. Knight e2, and then the knight will be able to reach g3 or f4. Needless to say, bishop e5 is a waste of a tempo, because c6, the bishop is just kicked out. He can't go anywhere at the squares back. He will have to go to e2 or f1. But f1 is basically where the bishop was. e2, well, the bishop could have gone to e2 anyway. We haven't created any weakness with playing c6. So here, after knight e2, black continues with the natural knight f6, and now knight to g3. Black continues with castles, bishop e2, and it seems like finally the white player has finished with development, because where else are you going to put that bishop? Black continues with h5, best move. The idea is to continue with h4. And black's next move is going to be bishop e6. Well, it also depends on what white does. An idea like h4 to block this pawn from advancing is penalizing white, since now castling will become much less safe, because then there will be empty squares around the king on this file. In the future, targetable pawns, since it's going to be difficult to target, to use the pawn in g3 to defend the pawn in h4. Also because this knight in g3 can't really go anywhere, or it looks like maybe it can. So h4 is a very weak move and is met by bishop e6 with the plan that I'm about to describe in this variation. The variation is this. After h5, white continues with taking the pawn. Taking the pawn with the bishop doesn't make any sense, because then white is giving away the bishop pair, and black's already better in initiative. I mean, that could happen. Well, what happens if bishop takes pawn? Then simply knight takes. Queen cannot take back, because then the rook is hanging, so after knight takes back, black continues with knight c4, and this stops the white player from castling, because if white were to castle, this bishop here will be attacked twice, and if white were to attack the queen first, rook e1, queen to b2, staying on the same rank. If white is really desperate and trying to draw maybe, then queen to a3 now, we have an escape in d6. And what have we gained here is that after rook a1, queen d6, and white manages the castle, we have a5. It might not look like a very strong pawn because it's an a pawn, but remember that this bishop is not going to be able to help. Yeah, bishop c1 is possible, but we also have a knight, a queen, and a rook, and white will have to invest energy and time into trying to stop this passed pawn. Black's position is evaluated like about a piece up. So in this position, as we said, the knight takes the knight. Knight takes back, bishop takes back, and now bishop e6. And the idea obviously to reach this lovely c4 square. So it makes sense for white to try and avoid swapping the bishop, because black doesn't have the bishop pair. So white just castles, looking for safety finally, but that is met with bishop b3, attacking the queen. And now we have a threat of playing knight to c4 and put two attackers over the bishop. Obviously this cannot be met by rook a1, attacking the queen in order to try and release the pressure, because bishop takes queen and rook takes queen, then white has a weirdly placed bishop in h5. So after queen, for example, to c1, The black bishop goes now to c4 and takes advantage of domination over the light squares. Let's quickly mention that after bishop to b3, queen cannot go to e1 because knight c4, it's double attack on this bishop, and the bishop can't retreat because queen takes rook, so that's not possible. So that's why the queen chooses, after bishop e3 attacking the queen chooses c1, bishop c4 now attacking the rook, the bishop can't retreat. Now white has an idea of playing rook e1 to save the exchange, or rook a1 to attack the queen. Well, rook a1 loses because of knight to b3, and what happens is that we are attacking the rook and the queen, so we're going to win the exchange. And if rook takes queen, knight takes queen, we have two minor pieces attacking the rook, and also there's this minor piece attacking the rook in f1. So no matter what, we're winning the exchange. So in this position, rook should go to e1. Now black continues with bishop to d3, dominating the light squares in the opponent's territory. And now black will invest his energy into the a pawn. What happens after the rook attacks the queen? Let's say rook b2 looks like a productive move, attacking the queen, queen to d5. Black has the idea of playing knight to c4. The queen is also attacking the bishop. Let's also mention that this is a wall of pawns that is stopping the opponents, the white pieces, from going into the defense of the king once black has activated all of his major pieces. So whether the bishop goes for an exchange or to c1, either way the move is going to be knight c4 and then a5 next. Well, knight c4 attacking the rook will move, and then a5. So, and let's just mention, if the bishop wants to go for an exchange, we're super happy because this is the stronger bishop of our opponent. So bishop takes, rook takes. Looks like the white player might be trying to activate the rooks, but knight c4 attacking the rook, and whichever way, rook b1, let's say for instance, a5 is the winning move.